Hey, hi. In this video, we will see how to use Visual Studio Code to create Azure Functions in Azure Function apps, and then finally create Azure Function app and deploy the functions into the Azure Function app from VS Code. So here, VS Code becomes kind of a foundational tool that can help you to design your functions in the function apps, and then finally, it also enables you to deploy the functions into the function apps. So here, you can use the VS Code to do this job end to end, right? So there are so once you have the VS Code ready, so there are like a set of prerequisite that needs to be installed on your VS Code as an extensions. So it includes Azure Functions, Azurite, Python, and other Azure related core tools, right? So here in this help file.txt file, I have documented the steps in a sequential order that you need to follow to actually mimic this particular demo. So first one is, you need to run the command, that is with using this command palette of VS Code. To run the command palette, you need to use greater than button and then select the respective commands, right? And those commands have been already copied and pasted in the order here. The first command that you need to run is, which is actually act as a prerequisite command, and that is to install and update any core tools actually. So what you do is you copy this one and come here into the search button and enter like this, and then once you are entered, what you do is you're gonna hit enter. So once you hit the enter, down the line, if you see in the output here, so if you see in this output, so there will be it actually invokes a command, that is npm command, and that will initiate the install of Azure Function core tools. So if you see here, it's actually running the a command, that is npm install Azure Function core tools. So this process will take nearby 2 minutes. So what I do is I'm going to go on a pause and come back after that. Okay, so waiting almost more than 4 minutes, we were able to complete the first command, that is actually Azure Function install or update core tools. Now we need to go to the next command, that is actually create a new project. So what we do is here, this is the task where we actually set up our function that we are actually aspiring to host in the Azure Function apps, right? So let's run this command, that is actually Azure Functions create a new project. So when you run this command from the command palette, so it will ask you like, it will actually help you to create the function template basically, yeah, within which you need to run in the function apps, right? So here, as you saw here, if I go back to this one previous command, so this is, it's telling me like select the folder that will contain your function project. So I'm selecting this folder, that is basically the folder, it's actually a path of my GitHub repository clone. So I'm selecting this local path, and then select the runtime language, that is Python. A model is version 2, and then here it actually telling like, select the interpreter to create a virtual environment. So I will go for 11 only, and then so here it says select the template for your project's first function. So my first function, let's choose the HTTP trigger. There are other trigger functions as well. So for now, let's create a HTTP trigger function, yeah. And here what I do is, so we will give a nice name to my function, that is called, say like the cloud quick labs func function, yeah, and then say Python. Yeah, so this is very long a function name I have given here. All right, so now what I do is I'm going to enter it here, and then it will ask you authorize the label to control where the function requires an API key and all. So for now, we will go with anonymous, which means that, anybody in the public can actually invoke it, or anybody in the internet can invoke it. So I'm going to select with anonymous, and as soon as I selected all those options, in the right hand side, you see that it creates a virtual environment, which is basically Python runtime virtual environment, and then it sets up the, the files and folder structure. Remember that this video will be a very vital video to understand for you, like, because Azure Function app is basically a bit of complex, in terms of setting the files and folder structure, because your function app will not work as expected if you have not created the function in a right format. So it also includes that you create a functions in a right format, with the right file name, with the right content, something like that. So for that sake, Microsoft suggests you to create the your function template, something like this, which I showed you. And then from there, you manage it as a version control. So right now we are done with the one part here, and if I go here, if you see, right, so basically now it has the folder structure been created. So remember that. So here the important files and folders which I would like to help you here is, so you have a function underscore app.py file. So since we have apped Python runtime, so it will create a function underscore app.py file. So this is something like file which is our function file. And then it has the, you can ignore the help.txt file which I have created for demo purpose. And then you have the host.json file. So this is the file, and it has a certain format as well. And then it has a local setting.json file which is actually used for locally developing the solution, in the sense when you have created a Python function app, Python functions of a function app, you need to develop it and try to test it in the local environment. So this is the the lab which will also help you to understand that as well, not only just create and deploy. So here we have a local settings which will actually help you to do that as well. Now it also has a requirement which actually help you to install the prerequisite here. So here so it is actually help asking us to install this one. So we can go to this particular, so go to the particular console here, to the debug output here. So let me try to come out of this. So we need to install this particular module of the functions. Okay, so let me try to go to the there are a lot many. So here let's go to the debug console, and then what we do is we're gonna run or basically install the module called Azure the Azure.functions. So let me rerun it. So here I'm going to copy this function because it says that it's not able to identify it, right? So I'm going to install this particular Python module, so like this, and then it should automatically go off, right? So for now we have installed it, and it should be it should go in some time. Meantime, what we do is I'm going to, so here you go, right? So it has went off. Now we go to the next step that is being written in the help file. So the next help file says that we need to update the local setting.json file. So let's go to the local settings.json file, which is created when I created the template of function. So local, okay, so if you see that local settings.json file, so here it is a Python, and then here it is basically something like use development storage equal to true, right? So we're going to configure that. So that's our third step. And then let's go to the next one, that is actually Azure Write, right? So Azure Write is basically now till now what we have done is we have set the template by running the uh, command palette, right? And then if you go to the particular project here, so if you go to the your what I can say, if you go to the your Azure extension, you could see that there is a workspace being created here. You see that we have a workspace being created, and workspace for function, right? Now what we do is when we go to the next command as it is suggested in this particular document, we go and run the next command palette, that is Azure Write Start. So why do we run Azure Write Start is basically this is the command which actually builds an environment, local environment specifically, which is actually mimics the Azure function of environment. And this is the basically it construct a virtual environment where you can run the your Python code before you deploy into the Azure Function app, and you can also locally test it. So for that case, let's go to and run this command, that is actually which starts the which starts those Azure Write services. If you go to this particular folder where we have created the the working directory of the function, right now you might see that something different has been popped up, that is there are lots of JSON file has been created. So those JSON file are being popped up after running a Azure Write.start command, right? And then we are set now. So basically till this step, in the sense you have set the format of the files and folder structure to run the Azure functions locally. Now it's time to run and try to debug it from the locally. So if I go to the our function.py file, so this is the file which is actually runs in the Azure function app finally. And when you create the Azure function app with using the when you create Azure function of the function app with using VS Code, so this is how it creates a template, right? And then this is very simple, the file which has the routes, right? And then so if you see here, it has a routes to this particular function. This function is receiving a parameter called request, basically require, and from that parameter it is reading the keys, and then it is doing the running this piece of code, which is a Python code here. If I can tell you, so if it is null, so it will go to the basically it will pass it. If there are something is there, it will gonna get the body. From the get the body, it is gonna go to the name. So if there are name is there, so it is gonna print this particular function as a response, or else by default it will print this particular statement. Yeah, so that is very dummy, the function up that Azure has created for us. But now this is the space, basically, this is where you need to orchestrate, or this is the space where you need to write your piece of code that you would like to run as a serverless in the Azure with using the Azure function app. Now we will go to the next command, that is actually to run this particular function. To do that, I will go to the run and I will say, run without debug. So what is that I'm doing is, basically, after setting the Azure right environment, I'm compiling this Azure function up locally, and we are running this Azure function locally, right? If you see here in the debug console, it is actually running this, so it is actually running the Azure Lite, basically Azure Core Functions tools, and then it is checking the prerequisites. So in my system, I don't have .exe, so it is throwing the error, which is fine. So I will just say like open launch, something like that, and I will just keep on going, which is absolutely fine. So you don't need to worry about this launch.json file, which is absolutely fine. You can just ignore it. And then you see that worker process has started and initialized, and here you go, right? So now you got a local, the function gets running in the sense it is actually deployed a function. It actually deployed a app, and that app is running a function, which is actually a function apps function, right? Now we can always test this piece of code, right? So to test this piece of code, what I do is, I'm gonna go with the two approach. One is, let's try to run it. So as I have showed you this particular piece of code, it actually returns hello, the name that you pass it as a parameter, and this statement. Or if you are calling empty, so it will actually return this particular statement. So what I do is, we're gonna copy this endpoint that it has created locally for local test cases. First, let me try to run it from the my Postman. So I have pasted that particular piece of code here in the Postman, and what I do is, right now I have a body called a name equal to Azure. So let's say this is called as a demo function app VS code. Okay, so I'm passing this as a body, if you see here in the VS code, and hitting a get operation. And if I hit enter, so we should see something. Here you go, right? So it is actually responding. Remember that I'm invoking API, I'm not compiling any piece of code, and we are getting the response. So that is the peculiarity of this particular the of this particular functions, which is compiled locally. You can also do something like this, that is go to your browser and try to hit this one, so it is also getting that response. There's one more option that you can do, is basically you go to your Azure extension, and there is a function being created. So that function you can also invoke locally by something like this. So once you invoke it, basically, uh, yeah, so I will just pass it as an input, and here you go, right? So it has executed, and then it will get a response as well. So that response also you can also see here. It says hello Azure. So this is what the response you got it from the VS code, right? So basically we are good with it, in the sense, this function is being deployed as a function app locally, and then when you call the endpoint of that particular function, which is basically an API endpoint, the function is getting invoked, and it is running a piece of code here, right? So we are done with the step number, basically, we are done with the step number 6. Right now let's go with the next options. Now you have set your files and folder structure of your function that you would like to run it in a function app. Now you can do it one step better, that is actually, you can create the Azure function app and deploy this function in that function app. So that is also possible. Let's try to do that. I'm going to do control C here so that I will just get out of the the execution of this particular function, right? So now let's go with the next option, that is sign in. So I will go to the Azure extension and we go to the resources here, and then you can, so basically I have already signed in. If you are not signed in, you can always try to sign in here, right? So when I signed in, basically it will populate the the resources like this. So VS Code right now supports the interaction with these Azure services, app services, app function apps, blah blah, right? So there are lots, a huge list of Azure services you can interact with from the VS Code. Now, right, so since I have already logged in, so this is how it is showing me. um, so I have selected this one, so this is my subscriptions right now. I'm gonna select OK here. What I do is, so far now, let's go with the next command. So far now I have signed in your case, you need to just select, say, like Azure sign in, and it will take you to the browser. In the browser, you make sure that you have already signed in into your Azure portal. So in my case, my Azure portal is already been signed in. And if I go to the Azure resource group, so this is my resource group is been created, right? So basically, VS Code will use the browser login session of your Azure portal, and then it will reuse it in the VS Code, right? So in my case, that's the same thing happened to me. Let's go to the next command, that is actually create the function and deploy this particular function. So we are having two steps now. We can quickly go to that one. The first one is basically create a function app in the Azure. So I'm going to go with that particular command. So it says give the globally unique name. So let me give the name like the demo uh, cloud quick labs, right? So this is my globally unique name I'm giving to this particular function. And here you need to select the runtime, that is 3.11, and then it is says location. So I would like to go with the US East one, right? So it has asked a bare minimum input to create the function app, right? Remember that. So this is may not be the vital, this may not be the the real use cases at the production gate, because you might be creating the function app with using the Terraform with a certain set of the function apps definitions. It includes proper function apps plan actually, and then the certain definitions of the function app, that you can always create the the blank function app with using any method. Since this is a VS Code based method, so you can always create Azure function app with using VS Code, something like this. If you see here, it's actually creating a function up with this the inputs. So we have given input like demo cloud quick labs. So what happens is it's going to create a complete set of resource groups. So it creates a resource group and contains a set of resources. Let's open this particular. If you see here, it created a resource group with the name. So remember that you give the name of that function name, which is unique, and it is not being chosen by some other resource group in the same region, because if that is the situation, it will throw the error saying like that resource group is already been taken, that name of resource group or that name of function app is already been taken. So I'm going to refresh it here. So it is going to create a set of resources as you see here. So it creates a app, a service plan, which is basically defines how your the function app web server should look like. And then it creates an app insight which is used for monitoring purpose. It creates a storage account which is used by function app for lifecycle management, and it creates a log analytics workspace so that the logs collected from the app insight can be used for further log analytics purpose, right? And then so then finally it creates a function app which we are looking for. And the output, if you go to the output, you see that the function up with this name is succeeded, and eventually we realized here in the portal that it is indeed created, right? So now we are done with the function up, right? Now let's go back to the our code. So if you see here, I know, so the last step is we can actually deploy this the function. So our function that we have created here, right? So if I go to the Azure, we created a function called cloud quick labs function Python. So I need to deploy that function into the function app that I created is demo cloud quick labs. All right, so let me do that by running this particular command. All right, so you can always do this particular command by go to this command palette and type that, remove this particular dot and hit enter. So what happens is, so once you hit enter, it will try to scan the functions. In the sense, if you go here, And now if you try to refresh it, it will show you the the function that is there in your Azure subscription. So in my Azure subscription, I have a functions, but it does not has any functions as of now. We are now deploying that from the VS Code. So that's the reason I'm gonna select this particular function here. So I have selected a function that is actually demo cloud quick labs. Once I select it, basically, it will ask you like, hey, are you sure that you want to deploy to this particular function app that is demo cloud quick labs? Forget about the spellings here, but this is what, we are actually, authorizing this VS code to wrap this particular source code of my function and deploy that source code into the Azure function app, right? And then finally manage it as a version control, right? So now if you see here, it is actually deploying the a function to this particular function app. That also you can see it from here, or you can also follow the VS code options always and try to see it here. So since we are invoking that command from the VS code, you can always see the progress note here by following the steps here. So if you see here, currently there are 4 steps that it needs to complete before it says that it has deployed the function into the Azure Function app. So for now, I'll go on a basically go on a wait here. As you see here, we are actually on a live here. So in the sense, we are actually giving you a live demo, like how does that it actually gives the response, and how does it actually looks like. So if you see here, it says that the deploy app is succeeded, and it says that the deployment to this particular app is been successful. You can always see the output here. So if you see here, so you can always check what happened, how did basically it wrapped that function and made it as a zip and then deployed into the function app. Everything can be tracked here in the output. Now I will go to the debug. So now remember that our function is being deployed. Henceforth, if I refresh it in the Azure extension, so we have Azure extension in the VS Code, and if you go to the resources extensions here, now we see that demo cloud quick labs function has a function called something like this. Now once the deployment is being done, it will actually give you an endpoint of the function. So my function app, this is my function app, and then it is followed by an API which is actually invokes my Azure function. So this is my Azure functions, by the way. So basically, so this is the endpoint that I can invoke now, right? So let me copy this, and we go to the postman here. I will go to this particular postman, and then now remember that we are not invoking the HTTP URL, but you are invoking the HTTPS URL, which is actually right URL of your function app. Now if you try to click on this one, it should give the response. So it is giving it in the sense you have deployed your code into the Azure Function app, which is basically serverless, right? And so it is giving us the response. So now what we do is we're going to go to the functions here in the web browser here, and then from there you can always list the functions. So here you go, our function has been listed here. You can always do the testing even from the browser, from the here as well. So let's do a testing here. So before you do a testing, you need to enable the chorus basically. So let's enable the chorus. So how do you enable the chorus? Basically this message helps you here. You need to copy this particular one and click on configure chorus, course basically, right? And then we're going to save it here. And then once you update the course, basically you can invoke the functions from here if you have the access. So you're going to click on run and test it here, and then we're going to, in the body, I'm going to say like here something like this, say like note that you need to give the you need to give the key name that is actually name, but you can pass the value something like blah blah, right? And the query parameter is not required and the headers are not required. You can use any method, that's fine. So we're going to use the hit run, and it has received the response, right? So we have actually received the response like this, right? Now what I do is I'm going to give you one more the piece of execution that you can always do. Go here and try to here, and you see that execute function. No, you can always execute that function from here by passing the the Azure functions. So basically VS code gives lots of opportunities that you can lots of features that you can try to do a local build and try to deploy it here. Now we are done with it basically, in the sense I have shown you from scratch to end like how to create a function in the workspace, and then how to wrap that function as a Azure Function app function, and then how to create the Azure Function app with using VS Code, then how to deploy your function into that. Right. All right. So now we have seen everything. Lastly, a particular tip I want to give you here. So when we created a template of your Azure function with using this the VS code, um, if you see here, there is something like function ignore. So the function ignore, basically it will ignore all these folders. Remember that it just, these are all the folders are basically the local execution supporting files. It is nothing to do with in your upstream Azure function app. All right. So at the end, what it matters is basically, it needs to have a function app file, it needs to have a host JSON, it needs to have a requirement file, it needs to have a local setup.json file, and then you need to build it in a proper format, which is actually followed here, which is basically very difficult to do it, beyond, beyond VS Code, I can say. All right. So finally, thank you very much for watching my videos. Can't request please to subscribe my channel. That would really encourage me a lot. With that note, thank you. Thanks a lot, and see you in the next video.